This week, for the AI engineer, we have a fantastic discussion on Langfuse. Langfuse is this startup open source around LLM observability. Together with Max, we are doing a deep dive into it. Later, also, we talk with Marc from Langfuse, one of the co-founders. And we really try to understand what's going on behind the product, what do you need in order to do, let's say, like your Langfuse clone, or if you're in this space, what are like the perspectives and the future for this type of LLM observability. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit of a thought that has been going on in my head for this week. And it is around the parallels between data science and how it started between 2011, 2012, and what we're seeing now with AI engineering. And this is because people are asking me, hey, do you think this will really become a profession? Also, people tell me, hey, what do you think is the future of LLMs? And I see here parallels on one side on the career perspectives, and also on the other side on the products and the future of the technologies themselves. So let's start with the career perspectives. Back in 2011, there was not really a data scientist profession. Also, there was not really a way to study it. I remember that it was a little bit of a topic that was being mentioned online. There were some articles, so Harvard, Business Review, they were saying, so hey, this is like the job of the future, the most sexy job, this, that. But there was not a way to really become one. And then this first generation of data scientists, they were mostly PhD graduates with advanced degrees in mathematics, in physics, and the like. And I also remember there was a few certifications around. So, for example, Cloudera, like this big data company that I don't even know if they still exist, but they used to have some certification on how to become a data scientist. And this was also because the market, they were not really paying attention, and you will never find a job of data scientist. There might have been something here and there in companies such as LinkedIn, potentially Facebook, but there was nothing like today where if you just look online for data science jobs and you'll find thousands of them all over the world. Back then there was really nothing. It took a while to mature. I would say it was really until like 2015, 2016 when we started to see things. Also the first study programs, first as masters, now there are even bachelor degrees. So I see something similar, some parallels in that the profession, it will take a while to mature. If you look at ways to become a data engineer at the moment, there is not really like a path. There is also no way to study it. Andrew Ng has been doing some courses in this direction, so for doing prompt engineering, to understand LLM better, and so on. But this is first not yet standard, where the industry acknowledges as the certifications, the programs that you need to do in order to be considered as one. And second, well, it's only one of like the ways to do it. I see that this is still space where there's a lot of space to define what is a data engineer or what it means to be one and how can one become one. And this is on the part of the profession. There's also a part of the LLMs and the technologies themselves. And here, very clearly, I see that we are experiencing something similar to what we had with the mobile revolution, where if we think back in 2011, 2010, when the first commercial smartphones came out, it was something where pretty much everyone needed to have their app. They need to have a way to install their own application on your phone. And we saw everything like restaurants, airports, all type of things. There was some application. And today, of course, we do not install any of them. Most of those applications are already gone. And now we are much more critical on what we want to install in our devices, what we want to have in our home screen. But back then it was everyone needs to have one, and there was clearly this idea of there is like a mobile strategy, desktop strategy. There was a dedicated mobile team that was thinking how the experience is and so on, and there was a classic web device, desktop device, also doing a separate platform. So for companies, it was this distinction between mobile is this up and coming thing, and we need to have this expertise, and also to be really there, have a native application. And it is a completely different thing compared to our legacy properties in the form of a website, in the form of a desktop application, and so on. And as we see today, this is no longer the case. Today, yes, there might be some mobile application developers doing mobile apps for a company, but this is more the minority. Now we think more as native applications that are exotic. So these days, we'll try to have a web app that is responsive and adjusts to the device. Native applications often only make sense for very specific use cases. And also in the case of like these airports, these restaurants who were launching native apps for mobile, now they have realized that for most use cases, there is not that much interaction. Plus all the cost and effort to maintain and keep these applications alive, that it only makes sense to have a nice responsive website that has some interactivity, and this is sufficient. And this is where I see like the similarity with all this space of LLMs and so on. I think that going forward in a few years, we'll not really see them as something special, but they will be hard embedded, deeply embedded into our own applications. They will be just smart features. We can think, for example, as an example here, kernels or transpilers. So where these are core elements of an operating system that every developer or close to every developer has to use it in some form. But the majority of them are not really thinking how they work. They're not really like updating them or contributing to the development of kernels. They're just there. They treat them as a black box, and that's pretty much it. So they will be the same with all this space of LLMs where they will be available on device. They will be available just for us to build things on top, but we'll not be thinking on deploying them on large architectures, on servers and so on. They will come integrated into every single device that we have, be a mobile phone or a laptop or maybe even smart fridges. And then for us, AI engineers, we'll be able to build things on top. It's also a question of, will there be local LLMs or it will be always cloud? And my perspective very clearly, local LLMs are the way forward. Sure, there will be cloud for very complex applications, especially if we think about agents to orchestrate them. But in general, for most use cases and how people will be experiencing this type of interactivity, this type of quote-unquote smartness, it will be rather with local LLMs on device that are, for example, already provided by NVIDIA, by Intel, and so on. And then we as engineers are working on the experience on handling this type of local LLMs and providing like the application on top. How long it will take for all this? How long it will take until we have like the first masters on AI engineering, the bachelor degrees, or to stop seeing LLMs as something special, to stop seeing generative AI as a separate category and just think, just as we say all companies are digital companies these days, that we say all companies are AI companies, and also that all applications are AI applications, it will take quite a few years. If we can draw parallels, likely it will be that in 2-3 years, there will be first educational programs that one can study in order to become a professional in this space. And then it might take a bit longer, let's say 5-8 years, until it become less unique and special, all this space, and become just bread and butter of what it is. But what are your thoughts? Do you think this will happen? Do you see it differently? Will this be something that maybe turns out differently? Maybe it turns out that in the end, we realize that LLMs have hard barriers to enable productivity and real use cases, and so far we only have these a little bit of gimmicky applications, and things will fizzle out. Or you see the other way around, they're here to stay, and maybe some of the things I'm saying are correct, will play out, and others not. What are your thoughts? Leave it in the comments. And yeah, so the next topic, we'll have now our discussion with Max, and after that, we'll be having Marc from Langfuse. So stay tuned. Today is our first episode of the AI products, and as usual, I am with Max, a veteran and a long-time observer in the VC industry and the corporate innovation space. Hi, Max. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. I don't know if I'm a veteran. It makes me look old. But hey, I'm happy to be here to learn more about AI with you.
Yes, exactly. And this is our first episode. So our goal with this series of recordings it is to learn together on how AI products are built, not only from the technical side but also as businesses. And if someone wants to build one AI application, one AI product, what is required to build?
hmm That's exactly what I wanted to learn more as well, you know. Coming from not a very technical background, love to understand a little bit more on the background, you know, what's going on under the hood. And then we can, you know, break it down, trying to understand what's different about some of the top AI companies out there. We all heard all the buzzword, you know, AI is going to take over the world. And the question is
Yes.
how?
Exactly. And well, this week, our first AI product, AI company to dive deep into, it is Langfuse. Langfuse, for anyone who does not know it, is a LLM observability platform. So what they try to do is to offer an open source product suite that allows anyone who is building LLM applications to do analytics and pretty much keep track of any errors and anything that might be going on with their LLM apps. What are your thoughts on Langfuse, Max?
So thank you so much for that. I think Langfuse is super interesting from my viewpoint. I guess ever since the ChatGPT craze, every single I would say large corporate under the sun were probably looking at Gen AI. Every single startup suddenly become an LLM user. So the ability to observe, I would say, your different large language model and how they're performing, similar to how you would normally observe your application, that in itself is super interesting. The market, I guess, is definitely huge. You think of, you know, if an AI can be applied to any software out there, basically your market is as big as the software company or anything that you can think of, really. And occasionally, it could be also things that you haven't thought of because that's what generative AI is trying to solve for, right? Generate something new from past experiences or data.
Yes, and what I find very interesting, and so you can tell me, so from your research perspective, how you see it, it is that this topic of observability for machine learning is actually not new. There has
hmm
been many successful products that do just classic observability for all type of applications, and then
hmm
specifically for machine learning models in the open source space.
hmm
So one can think of there is like evidently AI, for example, so for machine learning models, and then there is this new wave of entrants similar to Langfuse, who
hmm
say, hey, actually, for LLMs, for generative AI, we need a different set of tools. And yes, there might be players who were doing for machine learning models, like it's like classic machine learning, but this is not enough. And for generative AI, we need these very specific tools that are maybe adjacent, but are a separate market niche.
Yeah, I think the fact that you say it's nothing new, which is important in a way, right? Because the reason why there's nothing new when it comes to the need to solve the problem is the ability to observe what is running, how is it running, whether or not they're very performant. It applies to applications, it applies to machine learning models, it applies to LLM as well. With the, I guess, advent of LLM, basically all the tools that you would have normally deployed on an application and machine learning would also apply to LLM. So the same, I would say, problem sets still exist, even though your underlying models are different. So I think there is I would say, underlying need here that I would think of it being important because no matter where you go, you always need to observe what is going on. It's a little bit like, you know, watching the weather, in a way.
I- indeed. And um, so if we think about someone who says, "Hey, I want also to be in this space, and I would like to build a company space,"
hmm
what are you looking into in order to invest in this company? So if we think about like Langfuse, what would be the main questions that you will have in order to say, "I will make an investment decision, yes or no"?
So that's a very good question. I think with Langfuse, given the LLM space is obviously exploding at the moment, I'm sure, there are a lot of different considerations that we need to think of. I guess the first thing I would think of, Langfuse is about 1 year, 2 years old, would really understand the team. And based on, what I've seen, the team is, pretty impressive, really young team, really trying to do something different from what they're trying to do. The second thing I would think of, it's really around the market size itself. Based on what we just talked about earlier, I do believe that the market could be quite big. Generative AI as an application could be, very big. Therefore, the ability to observe it also becomes important. I guess the third thing is really understanding, how differentiating is the technology itself. The fourth thing is understanding, where do they stand? Like, do people actually buy the solution? I believe there's a need, but does that mean that, there are other software solutions out there that are ready to adopt it? If not, why now and how long more they will be able to adopt it? And I guess lastly, it's just understanding what's the moat, right? What if there are new entrants coming in or alternative players coming in? Why would LangChain stand out compared to other players, really? So I would say, those are like my top five categories of things to think about at the moment.
Yes. Let's dive deep into each of them. So you
Yeah.
started with saying the team, they call it team, and so they got into Y Combinator. Also, we were also looking at their investors. They have like big name investors behind and so on.
Mhm.
What do you think that so these big name investors are betting on Langfuse?
So I think from based on the product hunt launches and stuff like that, it feels like Langfuse is solving a real need. And I think there's definitely slight, I would say, ride the wave of LLM, right? Because LLM comes out, basically you have the underlying model, but you also need all the picks and shovels around it in order to build applications. And I think speaking to quite a lot of players in the market, um, I haven't seen someone that hasn't looked into Gen AI for certain use cases yet, for example. So it could be corporate innovation down to startups. Everyone is thinking about what are the possibilities of using Gen AI for whatever problems that they're solving with their software or with their company. So I think that in itself gives it a little bit of a view on why the market makes a little bit of sense. From the team's perspective, what I find interesting is based on some of the conversation that you talk about, which is their ability to pivot, right? So you talk a little bit about how when they enter YC, they come with a different idea, but quickly realize that there's an opportunity to do something else with this solution, and they quickly pivoted. That to me, kind of feels like a good team that knows when to change direction and have the courage and the ability to do it, because willingness and ability are two different things. So having that combination kind of tells me that they are doer in a way and possibly a quick leader in this space as well. And there are other things that I do not know. What are some of the things that they know that we do not know? For example, the first thing would be, the observability of a large language model becomes important. Maybe that's something that they found out. It's like an insight for them. It could be a port from other parts of the software chain that we have seen previously. So it's just a little bit of that. So yeah.
Yes, and into that and about the team itself. So I had already used Langfuse in the past, so I spent
Oh,
some time.
perfect.
Yes, and it was interesting because it is a new product, and as is often with new products, maybe not all edges are entirely polished. So there are maybe like a rough
Hmm.
corners here and there. But what was very nice was that the team reacted very quickly. They answered all my questions. They also fixed anything that was wrong and so on. So that also surprised me in how fast I got what I needed and
Hmm.
how flexible they were in order to adjust to what I was doing. Um,
So so back to you then. When you were using Langfuse, you really liked the team's ability to answer some of the questions and further. And when it comes to even without the edges polish, you were using the product. And the reason for that, why did you choose them over solutions out there? I guess just wanted to understand.
So what I like is that it's open source. Open source make it simple. If I
Mm.
just want to test something, then I don't need to talk to a sales representative. I can just download and install it, right? So there is no
Yeah,
demos behind. There's no signing up here and there. So just so download it
there's no
and get it up and
calendar
running.
invites.
Yeah, exactly that. Yes. So it makes it very simple, and not only that, but also they have I like the documentation. Documentation is
Mm.
something that I pay attention to in that very often many products that are open source do not have good documentation or documentation at all, and that makes it difficult to just try things. And theirs is nicely
Mhm.
done, and then I say, hey, open source product, good documented. There is a bit of a community behind. So if you look at the number of GitHub stars, they have around 1,800. So
Mhm.
this is not massive, but it's not bad, and this shows that there is interest. Also, if I look at so the interaction that happened on their GitHub repository, you can see that it is also actively developed. This is also another thing that I pay attention to. That if I see that there has not been a commit recently, then I think, oh,
Mhm.
maybe it's already like abandoned. Maybe there wouldn't be anyone to support and so on. It has happened to me. Like, so I, for example, open a ticket reporting something, and then it just languishes there. Nobody pays attention to it. And in their case, things are very fast. They reply fast and so on, and they show me, hey, if I invest time and spend time with this product, then I will get something out of it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think that has something to do with the fact that they structure themselves as an open source solution, and therefore the way you would pick up data, whether or not this open source solution is worth your time, is looking at all the different Git commits and looking at all the activities on the GitHub. That's super interesting. And should they be a non-open source solution, you wouldn't have that visibility in a way. Would that be, yeah.
Exactly. But I also interested in the topic of open source software. In the end, I guess this is more the broader question of how easy it is to put the product in the hands of the user. So where I see successful products that are non-open source, and they work well because it's very easy to onboard. So I guess this is the threshold. So how
Hmm.
hard or easy is to onboard someone into the product? And I see it exactly in the space of observability where there is a Datadog. So
Hmm.
as this is general observability platform, so like record your logs and keep track of what's happening in your application. They
Hmm.
have been around for quite some time, but they are publicly traded. They're huge, and they are not open source. However, it is extremely easy to just get started as a developer, and you can just open an account, start doing things. In the beginning, it's even free, and slowly, as you start using it more, then you start paying a bit more. But given that it was so easy to set it up, then it was possible to start with minutes.
Hmm. Hmm.
And in the case of open source, it's only similar, where you can start with minutes because you just download it, run it, and then you have it there.
Yeah.
The other thing is also that this statement is not necessarily always true in that there are a lot of products, open source products, where because there is no good documentation or they do not have this onboarding very well figured out,
Hmm.
it actually takes quite some time, takes some hours. So that's also like the other thing. So with open source products, I see that open source is nice, yes, but then at the end of the day, developers are like the most expensive so cost block in the
Yeah.
company. And if it is taking to the person hours or even days just to get things up and running, then yeah, not use open source, then go for a paid solution and have this comfort and simplicity of just opening an account and using it.
This is super interesting. I think this I guess ties into some of the past conversation that I've had with enterprise software. It's like when you there, for example, a long time ago when we were trying to deploy a blockchain solution, you obviously have the Ethereum. This is back in 2017, where enterprise blockchain was still a new thing. Where you have Hyperledger, the Afris of the world. And eventually, in my previous company, we went with a company that has some sort of professional support that we were looking for instead of going for, back then the gold standard of public blockchain, which is EVM and Ethereum alliances, etc. So I think that's super interesting. The ability to ramp up for a developer in a large corporate is important. Hence, documentation becomes important. Should you go down to the open source route, and if like miss in the absence of a open source model, if you're doing a large enterprise what you call it deployment, then you need a big support team to be able
Yes.
to speak to all these developers so that they can ramp up quickly. That's super interesting. That reminds me of that. I think good thing about LangChain is obviously they have two types of models, right? So they have the LangChain Cloud, which then allows you to do run it like a little bit like a SaaS solution. There's also the open source one where you can just download and run it. And I think at the moment they're charging on the LangChain Cloud, if I'm not wrong, with
It is Langfuse, Max, by the way. So there is also
Langfuse.
LangChain,
Sorry.
and maybe that's, but I think that's also like an important point. So at the moment, it is popular, so in all this LLM to use Lang something and so on. So
Yes.
how do you see it in this case? So like from both an investor perspective, but also as a potential enterprise customer and so on. Is it a good idea to, let's say, hearken into like a trend of names of if everyone in AI using Lang something, should I call my startup, let's say, like Langroth, or adding this Lang, for example, just add confusion because there are already too many fishes in the ocean? And
Yeah.
what do you see?
So this is a very interesting question. I think it's a little bit. So how I think about this is almost like KFC and McDonald's, right? They're already a very established brand, but they still spend millions and millions every year to try to stay on top of a consumer's mind. I think there's no different when it comes to solutions. You want to be able to stand out and always be on top of your top of mind. In this case, LangChain, Langfuse, they do two different things. So that kind of just help you to have that distinction, if you will. But should they be another observability open source solution called Lang something, then that might get a little bit complicated down the line. I guess that's generally, I guess, how I think about it. I do not know if it's right or wrong. But if you want to be top of mind, a catchy name helps, right? Every little thing helps, if you will. But yeah, so I think coming back to the business model of Langfuse, they have obviously two different deployment model. They are open source, but they also have an ability to deploy it on Langfuse Cloud, which I understand that they handle all the deployment, the scaling, the upgrade, and then they charge it. Um, I guess it's per seat if I'm not wrong, where they have like a freemium model you can try for
Mhm.
X amount of queries, and then up once you go up to X amount of observability, you will have different prices that you need to think about. So I find it quite interesting. It's almost like they're targeting a slightly different market, if you will, from a deployment perspective. So what do I say that? So it's a little bit like you allow people to use Slack for free, and eventually you just charge the per seat as you go up.
Yes.
So Langfuse feels a little bit like that, right? So you just take on the observability, but once you want to scale it, you do not want to have the headache to do it. You could always go to Langfuse Cloud to do it. So
Yes.
what do you think about that? As an ex-founder of an data company, AI company, you probably think about some of the pricing. So would love to get your thoughts.
Yes, so I think that this type of companies they can ride this trend of usage-based pricing. So where
Yeah.
in the end, every time that someone is making a new request or is submitting, let's say like a new log into the platform,
Mm-hmm.
this can be charged. And in all this is also already what so companies like Datadog and so on they use in order to build their users. It is very attractive because it's a little bit like pay as you go, and then the more you use, and the more you pay. At
Mm-hmm.
the same time, my experience so with companies trying to convince them to adopt this type of solutions is that the customers they want some sort of planability of saying I have a budget of X and this is what I will spend for this tool, and having this usage-based model then does brings a lot of uncertainty or
Mm-hmm.
if they will end up paying much more or not. But I
Mm-hmm.
do think that for a company like Langfuse, it is definitely very attractive to try to do some sort of so usage-based pricing. The other thing that is also common I have seen it is to have a mix of where, for example, there is a fixed component of saying, hey, you're renting the web interface, the web application, and then you're paying per month, let's say something small, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
even per seat. So $20 per user per seat and so on. And then
Mm-hmm.
this allows you to have so many logs that you can submit, so many records that you can like add.
Yep.
10,000, let us say. And then if you exceed, then for every 10,000 additional logs and so on, you'll pay the X amount. And so this way you have this mix of stability and this predictability SaaS style, but
Hmm.
then you're adding also this variable component that on one side lets you scale, but also on the other side considers that as a company, Langfuse, they have to pay for all this storage and handling all these records and so on and so forth. So they also have some costs associated.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I guess that's on the per seat solution, especially for I guess a smaller startup. That makes a lot of sense, right? Because you want to reduce the barriers to entry per se. If it's for larger corporates, it feels like they could go down a slightly different route in the sense that they give you the open source solution and you really like it, but as you scale, there is some sort of support that you would need, right, on how to work with Langfuse even better. I guess that
Yes.
could when they that could be a point when they step in and provide the extra, but then charge a premium for that. It reminds me of a solution called Hazelcast, which is like a distributed system, where they offer an open source instance of it, so you could just use it as it. But once you scale, you would need some sort of support. That's when they come in and charge you more. That's super interesting. Um,
And
cool. Yeah, go on.
now I want to ask you, Max, so from the go-to-market perspective, which sales motion or a go-to-market strategy would you recommend to a company such as Langfuse?
I mean, they're really indirectly taking that, right? With open source, they kind of taken the open source build the community side of things. The fact that they launch on Product Hunt, that kind of start targeting the, I would say, smaller LLM application developers to begin with. But at the same time, for larger organization, when they see all this great stuff going on, they could try out the open source one. But as they think about scaling that across the organization with thousands and thousands of microservices slash application, that's when they need, like a Salesforce to be able to deal with this team. In a way, it feels a little bit like Oracle and Java. That's how I think about it, right?
Hmm.
You want to use Java, it's open source.
Yes.
Use whatever you want. But then once you go through X amount of things, you will start paying. Which I believe Oracle did that in 2018 or 2019. They start charging for Java support and stuff like that. So I think that could be an interesting one. So they would start off with, open source, build the community. People like the solution, they use it. For smaller startups that don't have the ability to scale, initially, they could use, Langfuse Cloud. But when they penetrate larger corporates with all the LLM applications as it comes, then they would suddenly turn into, a little bit more on a um, I would say enterprise sales, enterprise solution kind of thought process. That's how I see they trying to do that. At least based on what we know now, right?
Yes, and so you brought here these interesting points of so by the fact of being open source, this is attractive for like independent developers, smaller organizations, and so on.
Hmm.
And I think this also complements nicely with the topic of so this usage-based pricing software. In the end, you can like try it, start, grow step by step, and so on, and
Hmm.
then maybe at some point you as a user become big and so, and then Langfuse grows together with you. And
Hmm.
the other thing that I wanted to like, discuss was on the topic of so here defensibility and modes, because from a technical perspective, I would say that a product like Langfuse is actually not difficult to re-implement. So where pretty much like the most complex part is on the storage of records. So where at some point you have all these logs that become so quite cumbersome to deal with them and so on. So you need to like think about like some sort of persistent strategy, and then things associated with that. So when you have a lot of records and you need to like do some computations with a lot of them, it becomes essential to do like fast
Hmm.
operations and maybe do some approximations in order to, let's say, so just to give a simple example, you want to know what are like the top three users in your application that are having some errors. And then doing this calculation can be quite computationally intensive, but there
Hmm.
are techniques that let you approximate this and let you get the results. Maybe not in the order who is number one, number two, number three, but who are like the top three. So that there are
Yeah.
things like that and some, but you need to get there. In the beginning, just having a dashboard that shows you these are my costs per LLM, per query, per application, what it is, and also having like some charts and yeah, like visualization and so. This part is rather straightforward. It is easy to
Yeah.
replicate.
Yeah.
So, what can be here modes? So for Langfuse or any other one who is in the space.
So I don't have the full answer on this. I probably need to speak to the founder to understand how they think about this. But based on where I sit today, you talk about the ability to collect all the different data and ultimately the ability to spit out information that is helpful for businesses. I think that would be the key. In a way, it reminds me of something I heard recently about Oracle. When Oracle first started, what happened was, applications were still early. They are obviously relational database, stuff like that. What they were able to do is pull all those information together and then show you a dashboard. That's what their competitors are doing. However, what their users are looking for, the businesses, were trying to understand business solutions, right? So they want to know exactly, like I said, who are the top three countries, which are the top three countries that we have the most sales on, who are the top three salespeople in those three countries, what are the top three products that those salespeople are selling, etc., etc., etc. And Oracle was able to compute some of that and be able to provide the answers on some of those questions. And I think for when it comes to Langfuse, in a way, they will have to tie that back, right? The development of LLM applications is within all the developers today, but eventually some of those, output from their observability would also play all the way up into I would say management decision, right? Understanding how well an application runs, etc. And I think this will only intensify, especially as you get into regulated industry. If you think about banking, which is an industry that I understand a little bit better, um, there's every single bank will have some sort of model governance. They will want to understand what kind of model being deployed. They want to understand how are those models spitting out information. They call it I'm sure explainable AI. And
Yes,
that's not just for internal risk monitoring, it's also for external reporting up to your regulators, right? Some
yes, yes,
countries, regulators require some disclosure on this, right? They require you to do something about all this AI if you were to deploy it in your applications. And all these models are not just for machine learning, which was the genesis of all those model team, but now with generative I think the same idea will probably carry across to generative AI. So the ability to observe it, number one, the ability to log it, and the ability to then explain what does those log means, and eventually be able to expose that to multiple different stakeholders that may have different questions as it relates to those logs is super important. So as you generate more logs, more data, more users are getting used to it. Eventually, you'll have some sort of user slash data lock in. That's how I see, which then makes it very hard to take them away. That also coincide with probably why they're doing open source. In my opinion, again, I can be wrong.
yes. And I was thinking about like the potential market size, so how this can be estimated on one side, pitching towards investors, but also like think how this can become. Yes, of course, it's like a bit of like guesstimation and so. But one idea I had in mind, and maybe you can correct me and say, hey, this is doesn't make any sense. But one way to look at it is think about like dogs. So in the end, the goal is to become like the next Datadog, and
Yeah.
Datadog is like almost like a 50 billion company, so it's on the public
Mhm.
market and so on. So they are at the moment valued at 50 billion, and they have something like 50% of the market. Yeah, so let's say like we are talking that it will be like 100 billion or so.
Yeah.
And if I look at on Product Hunt, these days Product Hunt around 30 up to 40% of the new launches are AI related, some sort of AI product. So it's possible to assume that at some point um, all AI apps, or not AI apps, all apps in general will become AI related. So let's say that from all apps that are in the world,
Yeah,
40% will be AI heavy. So from this 100 billion market, then 40%, so let's say like 40 billion.
yeah.
So this means this can be a company in that ballpark figure and so on. Would that be reasonable to like so present like that, or what would be, let's say, like a good way to quantify it, so for an investor like you?
Well, it is very hard to say. I mean, ballpark figure, if you think about it, will this be a $1 billion market? I think based on what you just said, at first pass, without looking at any data, I think it will be, simply because, like you said, there are a lot of applications that are going to be machine learning, then eventually going to be LLM, relevant. So how I think about it is, so if you think about software is really taking processes and then type them into code so you don't have to repeat the same thing, let the software do the thing. And once you do that, you then bring in machine learning, which allows you to identify similar stuff, right? Supervised learning, unsupervised learning. Ultimately, is still all about pattern recognition, right? Trying to find some sort of pattern. And then with machine learning done, now you go into your LLMs applications, which is built on top of software. Sometimes, a combination of machine learnings with LLMs, yada yada. So I think every step of the way, there's some sort of observability to look at. And LLM applications is obviously at the early stage of this. The current speculation is, everything can be LLM-fied. The question is how much of that will be. So I don't have the answer. But will it be $1 billion company based on, what we know about software, based on what we know about machine learning applications, and kind of extrapolate that to LLM applications? Yeah, the answer is probably yes. So that would be, I guess, the first way to screen it. And then if I were to do a little bit more of a deeper dive, then I will have to dive into, how many LLM applications being deployed, which LLM application would it be applicable to, how much seats are they, are people paying in order to observe the LLM. So then you kind of just do a bottom-up analysis on the, I guess, the total market. There's also a
Yes.
possibility to think about enterprise software solution, right? And enterprise spend X amount on software, on machine learning, on different types of LLM applications. So over time, what X% of budget is being spent on LLM ops per se. So that will give you, some sort of a ballpark figure. But I must say, at the moment, it's finger in the air. I really do not know. I think it's just interesting to see with the burgeoning and explosion of all these applications. It's good to see that people are building picks and shovels, right? It's a little bit like when the crypto industry went ballistic. There are a lot of applications that try to observe how the chains are doing as well. So I would
Yes.
say Langfuse in a similar space, but obviously in the AI domain.
And we have been discussing about so the case of someone building in this LM observability space, such as Langfuse, for example. But what
Mhm.
about those who are already in this machine learning observability that are more in this classic machine learning? Because the argument is those who are doing LMs, they say, hey, this is a different niche and it needs to be looked differently, and we're not competing with them, we're our own thing. But at the same time, those who are doing machine learning observability, they're saying actually no, because machine learning is machine learning. So you might have generative AI LLMs, but this is not really different. So for those who are already in the market, who are these existing players, but who are not positioning themselves as LLM observability, what do you think here is like the strategy to follow? Is it to start so using more a language around LLM observability? Is it more about saying, hey, actually, this is no different, this is the same? So what do you see as can be like options so for them in order to, let's say, quote unquote, stay relevant in this generative AI day and age?
So I think, I guess, good thing about some of the MLOps stuff, they're probably in a lot of the larger banks already. This doesn't need to be a bloodbath. This could be an ability to supercharge or increase their annual contract value with the large corporates that they're already serving or with the large clients they're already serving by partnering up with some of this LLM observability solution. Because they already have the clients, what you call it, they already have the client relationship. It's just a matter of expanding that relationship. It's a win-win in a way, right? And I think for them, if I'm running an ML ops, I'm already in some of the companies. What I will probably do is find some of these players to either collaborate with them and see if there's opportunity to expand their current relationship and current contract value with some of these larger clients. And if it does, to see if there are any strategic way to acquire some of this capability. And so it helps you to expand your capacity and your capability, right? Your capacity to expand the solution and your capability that adds on to what is it they're observing with ML. I won't be surprised if Datadog, would be happy to just buy up some of
Mhm.
this, Langfuse, to be honest.
And you brought a very good point on saying already many of these MLOps applications, observability for machine learning and so on, they're already in the enterprise, they have already customer base. And then this LM angle can be like a good way to increase the ticket size and saying, hey, look, you're already using us for this classical
Hmm.
machine learning model observability. So now if we start offering you also the LM angle, you will have these benefits, but of course it will cost you so much more, and they can
Exactly.
increase their contract value.
Yeah, I don't think it's about, I guess, competing to death. It's competition in a way. You always need codes and software, and even your models are written in codes and software. And if you think about generative AI, I was recently watching Ben Evans' presentation, and I think he has a point, right? Like even with generative AI, they're not really generating anything net new. And the reason why you say that is because really you're training your AI to be able to do some sort of approximation based on the prompt that you're giving. So what that really is pattern recognition. The pattern recognition becomes better in order to come up with something new, right? Top right corner, this pixel, top left corner, this pixel is based on the amount of data that you're feeding it. And the more you feed it, the pattern becomes a little bit more diverse. Therefore, a slight change in prompt changes how an image being generated or an output being generated. So ultimately, we're still dealing with a little bit of a pattern recognition. So I find that quite revealing from obviously Ben Evans, one of the top tech folks out there. So I think the idea of building LLM applications is now stuck with a lot of larger enterprises as well as startups. I think it will only accelerate, especially when some of these applications finds product market fit. And post that, then you will see a lot more, I guess, observability solution on all these different applications. Because the moment your application is out there, shortage becomes a problem. So, which I won't call shortage. If there are any shortages or any downtime, it creates a little bit of a problem, a negative connotation, especially if you're a consumer application. Therefore, observability becomes even more important, right? To make sure that it's always up, make sure it's always performing, make sure it's always getting your users what they really want. So it
Yes.
will only become more important.
What would be like your word of advice for anyone who wants to build a Langfuse competitor or for Langfuse themselves?
Good question. I don't think I have any advice. I don't think I'm qualified. But if I think about, let's say selling it to large enterprises, I guess one of the things that I think they're doing well, it's one of the open source capability. I think continue to build on some of the um I would say their features so that large corporates could use them. So when you sell it to a large corporate, there are little things that one would need to think about. For example, are they enterprise ready? Are they easy to install? If they were to use Langfuse Cloud, are there any SSOs available? Yada yada. So all this, the enterprise side of things will probably need to think about. And I guess based on what we have seen so far, I think they're doing a great job, to be honest. So I don't think this is an advice. I'm just thinking it if we were to use it, like if large corporate were to use it, there will be a few things that they would think about.
That's a really good, Max. So I think that from my side, um, so what I see like from the product perspective, it is I think there are always possibilities to improve like the onboarding to make it
Hmm.
easier so to adopt, and also I think that a lot of like education. I keep seeing how we are so early in this journey of generative AI, and then developers, machine learning specialists, and so on. They're still trying to understand and even start to provide a lot of guidance. So the more one can handhold these users and then offer not only easy onboarding but also provide resources to show them, hey, are these concepts and this is why it's important for you and so on. I think this is something that can help Langfuse or other players in this space to have a stronger foothold in the market.
Yeah, I think so. I think as LLM application becomes more prevalent, I think Langfuse will also become more prevalent, right? It will become more important. And then and for I guess different users to understand why that is the case is definitely the key. I guess Chase is I think one of the Khosla Ventures partners said chase value, not valuation, right? So yeah, cool.
Um, Max is having a fantastic discussion. So let us continue next week with our next company to assess, analyze, and explore.
Perfect. We're here to learn, and for all the listeners that are listening, if we have anything that you want us to talk more, give us a shout.
Exactly, Max. Well, then, until next week, Max.
Voila.
Today, at the AI Engineer podcast, I am super excited to have Mark from Langfuse with us.
Hi, thanks for the invite, Rod. Super excited to be here.
So, Mark, before we dive into the whole world of AI engineering, can you tell us a fun fact or story about yourself that most people don't know?
Yeah, currently, like most of the users and people in AI engineering I talk to, think I'm like fully computer science like all of my life. But originally, like after being excited about programming in high school, like thanks to a great teacher and mom, I got started like academically with like business in undergrad, and there found my love for like building things while interning at like a startup in Latin America, and only found my way back to computer science during my masters at TUM in Munich. And yeah, now very excited about building in this space, seeing what other people build, and this is kind of like my journey to business and back to computer science.
That's very interesting to hear and also very encouraging to everyone who is starting their journey because it shows how one doesn't need to be a pure blood computer scientist to get started, but one can come from a different background. And this brings me to the question of what was the aha moment that led you to start Langfuse?
Yeah, initially, as like a team, we joined Y Combinator in January this year, and then throughout the program, worked on like different LLM based prototypes and ideas. Like to name a few, for example, we initially built like a short form course generator where you can kind of have like a Duolingo like learning experience on like any topic you want. So if you want to learn something about quantum physics or like fusion reactors, you can just put it in and it generates like a micro course for you. Quickly realizing that this is actually like not as easy to get people excited about it, and it didn't work as well as we expected. We then moved on like building like an autonomous web scraper where you can input like for example names, put in rod, and it finds out like structured information about rod while searching the internet, and finally leading like from this kind of experience and always like experimenting a lot on these, build like a pull request bot for GitHub issues, and like throughout all of these experiments, always like building, talking to users, selling it to customers, we realized like how much like experimentation is needed on the engineering side, as it's like not clear what kind of will work and what doesn't. once you start and think like this is a good problem to solve with like LLMs, with this technology, with the different frameworks that are out there. But you need to in the end like start something, build like a first version, play with the product yourself, run some light evals on it, and then come up with the next iteration. That's what we've done over and over. And in the end, it was always like showing it to users and then realizing they're using totally different ways than expected. Like our learning bot worked well on like physics or microchips topics because we found it interesting, but then people use them for like liberal arts. Or like pull requests and GitHub issues, we run them on like full stack TypeScript projects, and people want to do it like on a Go SDK. And then realizing these applications then break if context changes or if user inputs changes, and you need to kind of monitor how they run in production. That's what got us started working on Langfuse.
Wow, and it's very impressive how you started in a completely different space and then got all the way to where you're now. But for those who have never heard of Langfuse, how would you describe Langfuse to someone who might be familiar? And why is it so pivotal for any budding AI engineer?
Yeah, the core Langfuse is observability and analytics for AI engineers building complex LM applications. So no matter whether you're using JavaScript, TypeScript, or Python, or like popular frameworks like LangChain or OpenAI, the SDK, or we also support like no-code tools like Flowwise, Langflow, or for example, Light LLM. Like what you do is like build a complex application, which is not just like one LLM call, but there's like lots of logic around of like retrieval. You chain them, or like there are lots of different kind of trade-offs on the application layer. And by hooking up to Langfuse, you can analyze cost, latency, and quality while iterating on the application in production. You can track your experiments to see like when you made a change, how this actually affects your metrics, and then kind of break them down by end users, close the loop by user feedback and running evals on them, and really having like a more structured process around building your application and understanding how it works in production. Open source at the core, as we see like the space to be quickly developing and love to collaborate with others people, e.g. on frameworks or like tools on the no code space, because we see many people like developing initial prototype maybe in no code and then moving to large applications. That's the core what we've built.
Mhm. So, in a nutshell, Langfuse will be a open source monitoring tool for LLM applications that enables you to keep track of what your models are doing, and in case that there is some error, be able to come and fix it.
Yes, like it starts at the kind of monitoring and production to see like what kind of errors exist or where you have the biggest quality problems. And but then it's often the question like where's this kind of problem coming from? What's the bottleneck? Because it might not be like an LLM call, but what kind of context you retrieve or what kind of API calls you make to internal interface that you have. And with the kind of traces you get in Langfuse, you get the full context of what's happening in production.
Mm-hmm. And so your users are very technical AI engineers, software developers, data scientists. Can you share with us a story where the feedback that you have been getting from these early users shaped or helped improve Langfuse?
Yeah, most of our users that have like significant production workloads have very complex applications. So that's what we've built, like all of our SDKs around to really help them log out these kind of complex traces and then attach all sorts of scores and feedback metrics to them, ranging from like explicit user feedback to like implicit user signals to model-based evals. But what we've continued to realize is that it's quite a steep learning curve to get started, and that's like continuous feedback we are getting. So that's led us just to like launch our OpenAI integration, for example, where it's like you just need to change the import. Instead of importing OpenAI, you import our wrapper of the OpenAI SDK, and you get like a head start on integrating with Langfuse. That's definitely has been something of a learning for us. That based on user feedback, that like making this kind of initial onboarding, seeing value quickly as an AI engineer is super important while iterating quickly on your app, and then gradually like adopting Langfuse instead of having to learn how it works from the get-go with all of its complexity.
And indeed, this is something that I noticed while working with Langfuse, that it surprised me how I came to the app, I logged in, and already I saw predefined dashboards. Everything was already prepared for me. And that was something surprising because I'm used to applications where I come and it's like an empty canvas. And then I ask myself, hey, what should I do now? Where do I start? And it's a bit daunting.
Yeah, I mean the dashboard currently we worked a lot with early users on it. Initially, like using like a no code solution for dashboarding, like just using Looker under the hood, to then iterate very quickly on these dashboards to see what's usually valuable for these teams, as many of their engineers don't know themselves what they really are interested in and what would be helpful. To then for all new users when they sign up and integrate with their app, that they see all the dashboards that other teams find helpful to have like a head start on the experience and know what to look at when monitoring the application.
And with that in mind, can you walk us through the typical use case scenario of a Langfuse user?
Yeah, it really depends on the kind of application that you're running. Most of them are like more like chained use cases, conversational, or like agents. Like I'll just pick like one, for example, like a typical documentation retrieval case with a Q&A chatbot. It's also the one that we have as a public demo on our website that people can just try. Where it's like on the one hand complex, it retrieves context, does things under the hood before responding, and on the other hand also conversational, where it's not like a single interaction, but it adds up to like a whole conversation with the user. And how Langfuse is useful in developing these applications is basically it traces what users are doing one by one in a conversation. It helps you monitor the cost, as you mentioned, and then see like when people, for example, report negative user feedback or drop the session, that you can see like what context was retrieved and led to these kind of maybe not so good responses. Because often it's not like the prompt of the summarization step that you need to improve, or like how to do the chunking and the embedding, but in fact it's kind of just people ask for React Native integrations, and our documentation doesn't include anything about React Native. So how should the Q&A chatbot answer to this question? So like gaining knowledge on like what to actually add, for example, to your knowledge base is something that people get out of Langfuse, as they understand that maybe missing documents in the knowledge base are actually like the quality bottleneck for the application. Yeah, and building on this, then people use the user feedback to mostly like navigate and browse these negatively voted traces. And for RAG especially, in addition to user feedback, what we are using in the public demo, we are also like partnering with Ragas, like a popular open source evaluation framework, to then evaluate model based without a known baseline whether the answers were actually good. So you can monitor some metrics without needing to put work or relying on your users to report feedback. And then use Langfuse data sets to collect like a representative input set of questions that people would usually have. So when you like develop the next iteration of your application, that you can run this kind of data set of known questions against it to see whether it works. That's kind of the full life cycle of how people work with Langfuse.
Wow. And so I see here you mentioned so document retrieval, so let's say enterprise search, and also so chatbots of different kind. Are these more of a internal use cases for companies? So let's say like for the internal operations, or are companies also exposing those applications to the outer world for their end users?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. But if I like need to discuss like what most of our users are doing, I'd say the more startup users are mostly like external facing, while all like enterprise teams working with Langfuse, like their production workloads are more on internal use cases for now, and we see them like gradually moving their like customer facing use cases to production. But like Langfuse is not like geared to either of the two, because in the end it's like kind of like the same kind of application, and the struggles are the same no matter whether it's like an internal or external user in the end.
Mm. And given that on one side there is so users or your customers moving towards these more user-facing use cases, this means that those developing these applications, the AI engineers, they need to know many things. And this means the learning path can be overwhelming for a newcomer. Do you have any recommendations for anyone to get into AI engineering? And is there any way how Langfuse can assist them in their journey?
Yeah, I think like to get started, if you've never built like an LLM based application yourself, I think even though like most of our users in the end have like their like more complex applications all in their code bases, and like start with frameworks, move off of them, build like complex abstractions themselves. I think to get going, it's super important to just make use of all the popular kind of abstractions to understand like how agents work, how like prompt training works, how the different models work, what the trade offs are, And I'd probably start with some tutorials from YouTube. And interestingly, the no code tools I think are super helpful for like even engineers to get started, because otherwise you're just like working on a lot of like code just to like uh, try some different agent frameworks. But like using, for example, Flowwise or Langflow, we've seen many kind of engineers being very successful with it in the beginning, just to have like a more like natural understanding of how these frameworks work. And then it's like useful because with both of them we just have like a drop-in integration where you just need to enable it. And then when you kind of have built your new iteration in no code, you can just like play with it and then see the full trace and Langfuse and understand, for example, for this agent, how did it actually use the tools? What came back from the API? How did this feed into like the context of like the summarization step that was sent to the LLM in the end, to really understand like how it's working once you use it. So yeah, the combination of both is probably like a good start for people who are new to the space.
And so before getting to Langfuse, you mentioned you were exploring multiple ideas. Some of them were in this LM space, some LLM applications. Which pitfalls do you have? Do you have any cautionary tales for anyone now building AI apps?
Yes, engineers, we were mostly thinking about like how to build like CI and testing and being like 100% sure that things actually work before moving to production, or like before selling it to more users. But in the end, we see like most teams also from within Y Combinator to just go out, sell it, see where it breaks, and then continuously improve while just labeling it as like, this is an early product. Like, try it. Let us know via the feedback in the product, or like measure some kind of metrics from user behavior to see what use cases already work and what don't. And thereby like moving fast, learning from the user, not trying to be perfect before shipping it. We see like more like the enterprise or larger teams trying to get there, like being like very sure about that things work, and it's just very hard because like having assumption of what user inputs will be, or what the context will be that people run it on, is depending on the application super difficult, and thereby you'll be slow. While like most teams have like a very like speedy setup in how they structure the team building these applications to then move to production quickly.
Hmm. So basically, you will suggest just to, let's say, launch, even though the product might be not 100% complete.
I'd say launch when it's kind of like working and staging, and give it to some kind of internal users to try it on different ways. Because often what we've heard working with like larger teams, that like the engineering or data science teams who build the application have like imperfect understanding of what the use cases are, or what users might expect as a result. So getting your internal users on board on like more like a staging environment to get like fast user feedback on what works and what doesn't, is super helpful before over investing, for example, into like evaluation frameworks on your application.
Hmm. So you will basically advise to first start with internal use cases, then the employees in the company can test them, and then once it feels a bit more mature, then go and then expose it to the outer world.
That's what I've seen as like a good workflow that works for some teams.
Mhm, mhm. And well, this field is moving so very fast. Let's say almost every 3 months there is something new, everything is changing. But do you have any vision or idea how this space will be evolving in the next 5 to 10 years, especially on the tools and platforms for AI engineers?
Yeah, it's interesting. Currently, many of the tools are still like they aid the development of LM based applications and everything that comes with it. But at the same time, they're not like purely like LLM or GenAI native. So I'm very excited about like automating a lot of the experimentation that's happening by data scientists and by engineers in the space. So once you have like a good understanding of what kind of use cases you want to test for, what kind of evals you want to run on it, you can then like automatically come up with different ideas, different prompts, different agent setups to then test all of them in a structured way, to like just drive the number of experiments up a lot. This is one thing I find very interesting. And then on the other hand, I see lots of like the like options to pick from just exploding. So I'm very excited about like everything that's kind of like open platforms that don't try to do it all, but focus on like one thing in the whole value chain. Then open about like integrating with other tools. So I think the whole tooling landscape will probably be like specific tools, but which are then open to integrate with other things. Interestingly, like on an application level, what I guess I'm most excited about is are all these enterprise use cases where I currently know like a couple of teams which build like agents for ERPs, CRMs, where like tons of people every day kind of do like data entry, sending emails, managing this kind of communication between like large companies, like how to. But in the end, this is kind of like an API, but it needs two humans. Like how to actually bridge the gap between like large corporations and use maybe agents and like text as like the least denominator, like the smallest denominator to try to communicate between these big enterprise systems. Yeah, this would be super interested and kind of like this vision of like distributed agents which call each other and kind of negotiate the interface on the way.
You bring the very interesting points, and here I'm curious. So now you mention agents. An agency is something where I have the impression that in many cases they make for an excellent Twitter demo, but then once one tries to really use it in a reliable manner, then there are many pitfalls. Uh, what do you think is missing for agents to become more reliable, more robust?
Yeah, I think with in contrast to, for example, like the React use cases where you can like just copy as like a cookbook, adjust it a bit, and it works for your use case. Like the teams I know that are successful with their agents or making great progress, that they all have very unique setups, and think about like how to make it useful for the use case to then actually build something that's working and that's unique. I think it's much harder to build something valuable on the agent side, and I think that it's just like again experimentation, seeing what works, thinking about like how to model the problem in like a generative way without just applying like a starter a cookbook or like some kind of framework to the problem. Because like yeah, if like something is autonomous, just planning lots of steps and always asking itself what else can it do, in the end maybe the work isn't done, or it's not like the most efficient way. Yeah, very excited to see more cool demos, but yeah, it's much harder to move to production with these.
Indeed. And whenever one speaks about agents, also it comes to mind all these topics of the future of work. And you're mentioning now that, well, they will be removing tasks that are repetitive. And especially for the technical individual, let's say developers, the engineers, data science, and so on, how much work do you think that all these agents, all these tools will take away from them? Do you think that at some point we'll have, let's say, like an AI data scientist that is like an agent taking care of all our data analysis and our data tasks? Or do you think we will just be a bit of a enhancer in our productivity, but it will never be impossible to fully replace the person?
I mean, we see it already today. They're like, I don't know about you. I think I don't know how many dozens of GPT-4 or other tooling queries I use every day. It just helps us to move fast with the product, to ship a lot because like some simple changes are just done very beautifully by Copilot, by GPT-4. It just works so well. And also on the data science side, some friends are working on ideas in that space. I feel like lots of progress is coming, and in the end, it's like knowing how to use these tools. But then, like an individual can have so much more output than an individual could do before, and that's kind of very exciting because I don't know. For example, for a data scientist, wrangling data or cleaning data with pandas, just like one thing, isn't that much fun. And being faster on the things that are not fun to focus on like the interesting, challenging topics, I think that's like a great future.
Yes, indeed. I think that when I see already what's possible today, and if the progress continues this way, then likely, let's say 5, 10 years from now, then uh, all this repetitive, boring work might be completely automated. And nevertheless, so today is still a very young field. It's completely green, the space of AI engineering. And as a result, many who are interested in this space, they're pretty much starting. They might be coming from other backgrounds. Do you have any tips, 3 to 5 tips that these newcomers should focus on, either technically or in terms of mindset, in order to progress in their journey?
Yeah, I think I would start to get going as quickly as possible if they haven't already, because it's just moving super quickly and it's fun to kind of like follow the progress, try different things, see what works, and like to just make it like a habit. And if I was working at like a bigger company, for example, now, like it's super interesting to just spot which kind of problems you see in your environment that could be a great fit, to then build a quick prototype, show the MVP to some people, and like get buy-in for it to actually work on it full time maybe. And like yeah, as above, I'd focus on like understanding the building blocks that are out there, to then understand which problems they can solve very well, to then be able to build like quick MVPs and prototypes to demonstrate like this could be useful. I want to work on it.
Mm. And you mentioned so this topic of the building blocks. What would you consider as building blocks for AI engineering?
I mean, it starts with just understanding like how to use like the bigger models, especially if you like work on something new. As I think like that's the kind of core audience. It's like if you build something new, and it's like the first MVP, most people just go for like big models, and then you need to understand like how do these chat completions and like functions, for example, from OpenAI work, or like the Anthropic models. Most people just go with like managed APIs, and then I'd focus on like prompt chaining, more agent use cases, and like this retrieval use case, as like understanding all of these already helps to like build something useful. And like if you integrate it with like an existing business workflow, I'd look at everything that's more about like structured output, because often you don't want to like chat isn't the interface, but you want to use the output to then do something else with it. So like everything that's around like output structuring or parsing is very interesting.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned this point of the interfaces and how chat is not the only one uh, available. Although I feel that when I see many demos, most of the time people limit themselves to what already exists. They saw, okay, ChatGPT was successful, and then we see more and more chat interfaces. So how do you think in terms of here usability and interface the development? Do you have any mental frameworks or any resources that inspire you in order to decide, hey, this interface should be just a text input or instead should be something more constrained? How do you go about designing this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that demos are often like chat based, but in the end, like the big use cases, many of them are also like more async or in the background batch workloads where you use LLMs for like extraction from documents, where you kind of summarize things and just do them asynchronously, enrich data that you already have. Like many are not even like synchronously user facing, so they have no interface. But it's not as cool to demo them as something that you can like play with. Like regarding the interface, I like everything that, for example, generates like more like front end components for the web is super interesting. Friends are building in the space, and but because there you have kind of like structured output that you then want to like render in real time. And like another common use case is where you, for example, generate like components in like a customizable dashboard. As you mentioned, for example, in Langfuse, you have this kind of pre-built dashboards to not have the pain of creating charts yourself. And lots of tools have like this kind of within product dashboarding experience where you need to think about like, oh, what's the dimension, what's the metric, like what kind of chart do I want, what do I want to have on the axes, what's the title, the date frame, how do I want to group it. And in the end, being able to do like simple prompt, and then based on all the context and like what application I'm currently using, like a very customized front end user experience, but which is native to the application, which is not just like, I don't know, a text summary of you. This was the revenue you had last year, or this was the number of AI open AI calls. But get like a dedicated component that like visually renders the answer like in the best way. That's very interesting. Like everyone who's doing like advancements on this.
So, do you have any companies or startups or even demos that have caught your eye recently?
Yeah, I was very excited when Vercel launched the V0 prototype, even though it was like waitlist in the beginning. And also, for example, the design patterns IO team is very interesting with their prototype, where you can kind of select the front end framework you're currently using, and then get like customized front end components based on your input. But also, like I mean, in the end, it's like front end. It's kind of visual. It's very difficult to describe what you want in like the first iteration, so you always do like a simple prompt to get to something, and then you can basically iterate with it on your component and be like, oh, I want to like a date range picker. But maybe it should also include time and not only dates, and I can add it as like a subsequent prompt and then get like the next iteration on this component. I find this use case super interesting because it's like a combination of so many like technical aspects, but then in the end, it's also just super useful if you want to ship quickly also on user interfaces, as we spend a lot of time on user interfaces. So yeah, super interested in that.
I agree with you. So I also find fascinating these examples where one iteratively can develop an interface and then want to say, now please change the background and so on. So it's very impressive and also a good way how even non-programmers can start doing software.
Yeah, and you have like this kind of live preview all the time, and in the end, you can take the code, copy to your own code base, and it runs. Yeah, super useful.
And if I look online, there is so much information about AI. Every day there is a new development, new publications, blog posts, tweets, and so on. So it's quite challenging to keep up to date and just follow what's happening. Do you have any sources or any websites that you like to check in order to stay updated? What do you do to stay here up to date?
Yeah, for me, it's mostly Twitter, like following the right people and then having like this constant stream of new frameworks, interesting demos, updates from other people in the space, other kind of. I like to follow founders and builders who build like complementary products and projects, where it's just interesting to see how they drive kind of new advancements on evals, on like abstractions around like prompt chaining and prompt iterations, and that's like my core like source of information, next to other founders who build on the application layer. Just talking with them, seeing what kinds of new kind of abstractions and ideas they use to make their products useful, and then talking to larger companies to realize what of this is actually like gaining attention of bigger teams. Yeah, it's mostly for me talking to users and chatting with them in the application. That's my like Twitter, and these are my largest sources.
Okay. Then thinking about just the future, and at some point we'll have these super smart AI assistants. Is there anything that you could think of that you would like to have an AI assistant? For what will you use it and why?
Yeah, if I think about like non-work, I think like the whole meal planning, what do I actually eat, would be super fun. Like someone who is basically like your personal chef, designing like your menu, like what you should cook over the next weeks, and then maybe like order groceries, do the whole thing. But also like to personal preferences of being like it should be fast, should be healthy. This could be interesting. I feel like nutrition, sports, there's a lot to be built, which is like B2C and fun, because I feel like the interesting things are like B2C, and the kind of useful things are B2B.
Yes, I think the idea of the meal planner, so especially on how all these LLMs have pretty much the whole database of recipes and so on, and then how can one specify I have these allergies and I have this preference and so on, and then what happens if I modify this and that? It can make up for a very nice product.
It's like in the end, everything where you have like professional services, but for end consumers, but which is only like available for people who are rich, and you can now build products to give this kind of service to everyone. This is super cool.
Yes, exactly. So the democratization that AI achieves is amazing. Um, and as a wrap up, is there any message that you would like that we share with the audience that they can take away from this conversation?
I think at the core, there's like so much to be built, so many kind of problems out there that are still like to be solved with LLMs and all the kind of frameworks and ideas around them. In the end, it's like AI engineers, data scientists who iterate a lot on these applications to make them useful, and yeah, who need to embrace like experimentation to see what works and what doesn't, to then like go one by one on these use cases. And yeah, I'm super excited to see like what like all the products that will launch over the next month and years, because all this technology is kind of there, and now it's like for the engineers to figure out how to like actually achieve like production grade outcomes on these use cases.
Yes, and I'm sure that Langfuse will play a pivotal part in all this. And with it in mind, I'm very thankful to have you today, Mark. And please, everyone, check Langfuse. How can people find you? How can people follow you? Where can people reach you?
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Rod. Easiest is langfuse.com. Also on GitHub, it's just langfuse/langfuse. Or follow me on Twitter, it's Marc Klingen. Yeah, thanks a lot for the invite again, and excited for what's coming over the next weeks.
Thanks so much, Mark. Have a great day.
Thanks.
So this is for today. What do you think? Did you like it? Do you have any comments, criticisms? What should we keep? What should we change? Let us know in the comments. Remember to vote, to subscribe, to leave your review. All this helps us to understand what we can do to get better. And remember to always visit theiengineer.co and to follow us on our social media, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, everywhere. So this is for this week.